Okay, so I think we are ready to start. Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be hosting all of you for today's program, Unleashing the Power of Family Businesses in a Post-COVID World. My name is Maria Lourdes Gallo, and I'm Vice President and the head of the Miami office at Council of the Americas. We're proud to provide a platform for dialogue to contribute to the important conversation around the future of family businesses. We know that family businesses are really the backbone of Latin American economies, accounting for 60% of the region's GDP and employing more than 70% of its workforce. And we do hope that today will be the first of many, many collaborations on this topic. First, our guest moderator, Josh Barron, a partner at BanyanGlobal and the co-author of the Harvard Business Review Family Business Handbook, How to Build and Sustain a Successful, Enduring Enterprise, will offer insights into why family businesses will emerge from the pandemic not only stronger than ever, but with a competitive advantage over their peers. Following that introduction, a distinguished panel will engage in a conversation with Josh about specific competitive advantages family businesses have, lessons learned through the pandemic, the importance of developing a family talent machine, and where family businesses can and cannot compete with public companies. Afterwards, we'll open the room for questions and comments from the audience. We really encourage you to take this opportunity to engage with our speakers and our moderator. To do so, you can send a message to Cindy Valladares using the chat feature. A very, very special thank you to our sponsors, Chevron and Greenberg Traurig, and our content partner, the Boston Consulting Group. Your support has allowed us to continue to convene and provide a space for collaboration and connection even during these very, very challenging times. So thank you. Before we begin, I want to turn the floor over to our guest chair, a dear, dear friend, Jorge Becerra, Emeritus, I'm sure I didn't say that right, Senior Partner and Senior Advisor at the Boston Consulting Group. Jorge, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you, Maria Lourdes, Council, and our presenters and panelists. I'm, so excited about having this topic at the core of the agenda of Council of the Americas. As Maria Lourdes said, we know about the two-third rule of the role of business, family businesses on economies. And I think recent years have shown research that it's somehow separating myths versus reality. And the reality shows that despite that size, family-controlled enterprises have been able over long periods of time to provide value creation rate higher than their comparables that are not family-controlled, between 100 and 200 basis points of differentiated value creation rate. The second one that they are showing is around a topic that has increased its relevance in the last 10 years, that it's about corporate longevity. They are showing longer longevity as an expression of their sustainability. And finally, I think all the crises that we have gone through, and in particular the recent on the COVID, are also showing evidence, hard evidence about the correlation between employee engagement and corporate performance. And family-controlled enterprises are the ones that are showing higher level of employee engagement based on the true integration of their founders' values and their strategy. So we are so excited that it somehow has been a bit the elephant in the room. Family business are now a part of this central agenda. And finally, one word regarding the discussion. A lot has been said and written on family business, and most of the focus tradition has been on family protocols, family succession plans, but less has been analyzed and discussed on the relationship between owners and their entities and the ability of the owners to lead the strategy of the organization. That has been distinctively brought by Banyan, both on their book, but mainly on their practice as advisors. So we are very excited that the heart of the matter, that is how owners really lead that strategy, will be part of this discussion. As Maria Lourdes said, Josh is a very good friend and a founding member of Banyan, and he will be sharing some of the observations that are coming from their practice around the world, but mainly also from this book. And as a panelist, we have also very good friends, Federico Braun, the president and chairman of La Anónima, a more than 100 years old food retailer and supermarket chain across all Argentina, and also he's a board member and owner with other families of a leading financial group in Argentina, Grupo Financiero Galicia, and many other activities as a key constituency of the leadership of businesses and society in Argentina. Then Luis Herminio, who is a fourth generation family member in Grupo Bontorantin. You are leaving a very special week with a listing of CBA, one of the leading industrial assets of Grupo Bontorantin this week. So congratulations, Luis Herminio, for that. But he's today the only family member that is part of all the bodies, the governance bodies of this large and diversified family conglomerate in Brazil, and a global leader. And finally, Enrique, another good friend, who for more than 30 years, he has been the CEO for Grupo Proesa in Mexico, one of those distinctive cases of companies that started being too national and really become, over his leadership, in a global challenger, a leading competitor, the global scale on the segments where he worked. So now, moving to Josh, I'm very keen to listen your observations and further to that the discussion with the panels. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you, Jorge. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you to Maria Lourdes and the Council of Americas team for putting this together. I'm very excited to be with you. I will offer just a few comments to frame this discussion, and in particular, to make the connection between ownership and how it affects family businesses and all businesses. And then we'll really dive into the questions with the panelists to understand how you put these things into practice, which is really the most important part of it all. So let me offer just a few comments. Let me know if you can't see the presentation. Okay. So I teach at a business school, Columbia Business School. And the way that we teach and talk about business is through really the classic pyramid of the CEO at the top with the managers and the employees. And really, we're not alone in teaching and thinking about that way. Most of the way that we talk about business and leadership and company success and everything is really looking through the focus on the CEO, the management team, and down. But what's important to keep in mind is that this is really one model of ownership. It's the public model, where the executives rule and the owners exercise their influence mainly by selling shares. If you're the owner of a public company, you don't get to do very much. You can attend an annual meeting, you can sign a proxy statement, but your role is pretty limited. You are an investor. You don't have a lot of influence over the long-term success or long-term failure of the business. In a family company, as all of us who are part of family businesses know, it could not be more different. The owners are usually present, they're active, they are engaged, they care about this business. Rather than being investors in hundreds or thousands of companies, they're invested in this particular business. And because of that, we start to see the impact that ownership has, because ownership brings with it an incredible amount of power to influence the success or failure. And that's the hidden pyramid that's at the top of a family business. You have the board, but ultimately the board answers to the owners, and ultimately the owners are the ones who direct and shape the long-term success or failure of the business. And that's what we mean when we talk about this idea that ownership has power. When you think about ownership, I want you to think about something you own. Think about your home, for example, and think about the various ways in which you can influence it, the way that you can make choices about it that no one else can. Everything from who gets to visit, to what color you paint the walls, to when you want to sell it or pass it down to your children. You as an owner have the ability to shape or influence everything of importance about it. You have the right to be able to do that. That's what I'm referring to when we think about the power of family ownership. The owners have the exclusive right to make almost every choice about what happens in a family business. And with that right comes the power to determine the ultimate course of the company. And what we see is that owners can use that right and that power to destroy the business. And we all know examples. They make for great stories in the media, make for television shows like Succession and others that talk about the ways that families can destroy businesses faster. Family feuds can destroy businesses faster than anything else. But there's a flip side of that, which is the power to sustain. If you look around the world, not only are economies dominated by family businesses, as Maria Lourdes mentioned, but also if you look at the list of the longest lasting businesses in the world, they are dominated by family businesses. Family ownership brings the power to sustain a company in a different way, the ability to make decisions that allow companies to last for hundreds of years. And that's really this focus, this idea of the power to destroy and the power to sustain is really the focus of this book. Jorge says of our practice at BanyanGlobal, but of this book my colleague Rob and I have written that came out with Harvard Business Review earlier this year. And always delighted to talk about some of the things that can help you either destroy or sustain a business. But today we actually want to talk about something a little bit different, which is how can you use ownership to actually compete as a company? I've, over the course of my career as a strategist, working for Bain & Company, and then in the family business space for about 15 years, I've had the pleasure of working with all kinds of companies, largely held public companies, private equity-backed firms, a lot of family businesses. And one thing I can tell you is that the way that companies compete is very different depending on how they are owned. And over the last few years, I've been working to better understand these differences, and in particular, the ways in which family businesses can outcompete their rivals. And what I've found is that there are a few core ways in which a company's ownership affects its ability to create a competitive advantage. And let's talk about those, and then we're actually going to dive into them with the panel. So if we think about competitive advantage, ultimately, the companies that win are able to allocate their resources to outcompete their rivals. And if you think about what that means, you can create competitive advantage either because you have better resources, you have better capital than other companies, or you're better at allocating. The quality of your decisions is better. Hopefully both. But those are the lenses, those are the ways in which ownership can potentially affect the ability of a company to compete. And so if we break capital down into the three main types, we have human capital or talent, we have financial capital or investment, and then we have social capital, your reputation with your customers, suppliers, communities, and so on. And then we think about decisions. There are two main types of decisions. There's the operational management decisions. You're running the business every day. And then there's the governance decisions. How do you connect between those that are running the business and those that are owning the business? And ownership actually affects both, affects all of these things. It affects both how do companies access resources, what kinds, the quality and quantity of each of those kinds of resources. It also affects how they make each of those different kinds of decisions. And when we see changes in the environment happen, the competitive context, what we've seen over time is that in general, not in every industry and not in every country the same way, but in general, the way that changes have happened have been towards things that family ownership actually brings a potential advantage. And that's really where we want to focus the conversation today. We'll walk through each of these 5 different levers through which family ownership can affect competitive advantage. And I'll have the panelists talk about some of their experiences in building and sustaining those advantages. So let's turn to that. Before we jump into talking about the future, it is, since we've been dealing with this crisis over the last year and family businesses have been dealing differently with COVID and other kinds of companies, I thought I'd start by asking a couple of the panelists to share their experiences in managing through COVID, and in particular, how being a family business might have affected their ability to navigate that crisis differently than other kinds of companies. So Enrique, I'll first turn to you. Can you talk a little bit about how COVID's affected your business and how you've responded, and maybe how being a family business has been either helpful or less helpful in dealing with that?
Certainly, Josh, and thank you for the invitation from the Council of Americas. I appreciate the invitation, and with some of the friends that selected me to be in this part of the panel, I hope my comments are useful to all of you. and I'm sure I will learn a lot from there. Just a little bit of context. We have, Proesa is diversified on two major platforms, mobility and agribusiness. And we operate in 7 countries, mostly in America, but some in Asia. And we supply big products that doesn't, especially in the automotive, is where we were hit more mostly. We ship products mostly to the countries, except Mexico, that we export a lot to the States. And the industry had really severely impacted by COVID because it basically shut down 2 months, zero new sales in 2 months, with a lot of uncertainty of when the revenues will come back. The level or the strength of the recovery, and the lack of coordination between Mexico and US, it represented a lot of challenges. Plus all the uncertainty to our people, regarding COVID, how to manage, how to take care of your employees, etc. I would say that was a major undertaking that we had to do. And on the other side, the agribusiness had minor impacts. If you take total demand, was probably similar, a bit higher. The mix changed, the retail increased, but the food market just disappeared for a while. However, we decided, with all this diversity and all these countries, to establish or to develop 8 principles to guide us through decision-making process in the crisis, because we needed to take decisions fast and we couldn't centralize decision making. So 3 of them were related to pandemia issues. Like the first one is colleague safety and health is number 1 priority, including their families. Second, let's help the most vulnerable around us, and it relates to the communities around us and the people around us. And thirdly, people will remember how we have led as we behave in this crisis. I think those basic principles related to COVID were key in dealing with the pandemic. And I believe that these principles reflect the culture and the values of the family. It reflects our mission and our values, and we think it's very, very important impact in that, being a family business, that you can be consistent through time and coherent in these aspects.
Thank you, Enrique. And such an important point about how a crisis reveals your character, reveals your values. And it's great to hear the way in which you are so consciously molding your response to align with your family values. Federico, can you talk a little bit about how your business has dealt with COVID?
Yes, of course. As you know, we are a supermarket chain that we are leaders in small and medium-sized cities, mainly in Patagonia region. In a certain way, it was easy for us because we were considered essential, the same the supermarkets and the 2 slaughterhouses that we have. We export meat. So in that point of view, from that point of view, it was easier for us than other type of sectors or economies. But it has been very hard. From the first day, we decided to keep in mind 5 C's, what we call the 5 important C's: to be calm, to communicate, the coordination, confidence or trust, and community. That we should, as Enrique said, we should finish this long journey to being better. The second aspect that we always do is we benchmark everything. We have a group of supermarket owners from Latin America and Spain, so that gives us the advantage to see what happened in Europe before it came in the COVID to Latin America. So we copied the protocols, and we were prepared in 24 hours at doing homework on all from all the people who works at Buenos Aires. And so we were able to be leader in these small cities. We went to the authorities and we said, here are the protocol for a supermarket. And so everything became easier for us in a very complex situation. And if you know Argentina, Argentina is very special. The politicians, they think they know everything, and they normally produce laws and rules that are impossible to accomplish. So this gave us a fantastic advantage to be prepared, rapidly put on all our processes the ability to be at home working, and a very, very interesting thing is that it gives us the opportunity of accelerating the process in which we were beginning in the e-commerce. We had e-commerce for non-food, but we thought that for food, that will become 2, 3, 4, 5, and we put on operation food e-commerce in 3 months. And this is something that was fantastic. And the advantage, as I always say, is that the decision making is very fast in our company, because we are very, very close from the people, the management.
Thank you, Federico.
And particular aspect that I want to mention, that we did the process that to change. I was the chairman and CEO at the same time for 43 years, and we were thinking and we were working for that, to give the CEO to my son Nicolas, who is present here in the audience, and that was very well accomplished.
Congratulations. Always a big moment. And thank you for sharing those perspectives. I really like the 5 C's, especially the calm one. That's I heard that a lot in talking to family businesses, because if you've been around in a country like Argentina or any country for so long, you've been through a lot of crises. You've been through a lot of moments of disruption. And I see this sort of sense that, okay, this will be bad. We've been through bad before. We'll make it to the other side. It's really just about how we're going to do that. So I really like that. Good. Okay, we're going to shift now, and we're going to talk about these different sources of competitive advantage and how family ownership can allow companies to emerge stronger than ever out of the pandemic. We're going to start with human capital, or talent. As Jorge said, having an engaged and motivated workforce is becoming an increasingly big advantage in most industries. Family businesses are able to bring their values into the company across generations. They're able to make long-term investments in people. I've seen oftentimes a loyalty effect of being, people want to work with the owners of a company and stick around because they have those relationships. They're also able to develop their own talent pool by training and developing the next generation, passing them on, as you've mentioned, Federico. So sticking with you, Federico, for the moment, in what ways do you see being a family-owned company help you to attract, retain, and motivate your employees?
Well, it's the possibility. In my case, I entered in the company 43 years ago, when the company has become a small company. There were only 265 people and only 11 supermarkets. So many of the people who works for us have been young still, but at the same time they have 20 or 30 years of working with us. They have seen how we grew all these 40 years till the last crisis, and how we have managed all these crises, because if something we have in Argentina is crisis. And in each crisis, we suffer in the short term, but we get better in the long run. And this is something that people love to. I took from, I don't remember the book, but management by wandering around, to open doors, everybody can see and discuss, to be democratic in a certain way. I always say that first we have to discuss and convince people, and then it becomes a law. But always with bottom up, to discuss, to interact with the people till they get convinced that what the decision you are taking is the correct one.
Thank you, Federico. Enrique, your business has built a base of loyal, committed employees. How have you done that, and how has family ownership affected your ability to do that?
Thank you. I think Federico mentioned some of these factors. I will not try to repeat them for the sake of the audience. But I would say that a clear philosophy and culture with values and behaviors that are expected and are consistent through time, I think is the key to create a culture and loyalty with the employees. Especially, I would say, during hard times, during crisis, is the most important, because when everything goes well, you do things, no problem. It's easy. But when things are hard, when you're losing a lot of money, when you don't have certainty, and you stick with those values, and you show the people how much you care for them as persons, and then you gain a lot of loyalty. And I think family business are positioned to that, because that's the long-term thinking as a family, leaving a legacy. And I think this is the key. In Proesa, we have a very humanistic philosophy where the center is the person, and we try to develop them. They have to develop, but we provide the means for their development, not only at work. Of course, they need to be good workers, but most importantly, as a person in all dimensions. So we really put a lot of investment there. And I would just mention one example of how we behaved in this crisis, to be more precise. We had this problem with the Seguro Social. Just to mention, 92% of the people in our group said is proud to work in Proesa. And the benchmark, the global HP benchmark in the world is 68. So we were 24 percentage points higher in how people felt about it. I think how much is that worth? The engagement, that loyalty? I don't know, but it's been proven that if you take care of your people and you really see them as persons, as if they were your sons, then they will become loyal and will return it in many aspects.
What an amazing example, Enrique. Thank you for sharing. And I really like how you talk about that people-oriented approach to business and how it pays off. And maybe you can't quantify it in the short term, but you know for sure that it's happening in the long term. And that's part of what family businesses are able to bring. Let's shift gears a little bit. We're going to talk about financial capital, about investment. And if you compare family businesses to other kinds, to public companies, they tend to have more conservative balance sheets. They tend to borrow less, and they're able to take a longer term time horizon when making investment decisions. You don't have to worry that necessarily that a investment will pay off in the next quarterly earnings cycle or even the next year or two. You can make investments that pay off in the longer term, but only if you can keep your owners committed. If everyone wants to leave, then your capital base is leaving too. You can't stay committed. So Lisa, I'm going to bring you into the conversation here. You have a large family, a large business. How do you keep a growing family committed to being owners across generations? And maybe start by telling everyone just a little bit about your family and your business. Luis, you might be on mute. Can you try to?
Said words in recent years.
Okay.
Recent year.
Good.
Anyway, you are a large conglomerate corporate company here in Brazil, and you operate in different sectors such as mining, cement, orange juice, banking, until last year, paper and pulp. But your question is not very trivial because I think along the journey of the family business, there are enormous challenges, mainly when you go through economic cycle that's not very profitable. Also, when you have a change in family member leadership along, in periods of transition, especially when the new leadership comes from the new generation. So these are really moments where it's not very easy to keep all the family together. And I think some of the challenges of family business to keep all the shareholders together, first is for you to have established a well and fair governance system based on meritocracy, based on trust building and transparency. Because if you do not build trust among all your family members, I think by the time you have a bad economic cycle, people start to think about liquidity and they start to gossip, and especially people that are not active in any sense of the governance of their company. Also, another key factor, I think, to keep them together is from time to time, I think a family business, they have to refresh and set and have a genuine set of values and purpose of their company, because this can bind people together. They glue family members together through the purpose and values. And also, another important thing is that should have efficient communication, because sometimes there's a lot of distortion in the communication, what you communicate inside the company, what other family members that are outside management of the company they hear. So communication is also essential to keep them together. And it's very common in families, especially like in South America, Catholic families, like you have even growing family members coming to the business. I think it's very important for you to create a mechanism, maybe like in our case it was a family council, where people can focus on individual needs of the family. And when I talk about individual needs, are the needs, financial needs, education needs, have a career counseling, have them understand the history of the company, the foundation, what are the governance rules right now, so they can have the right expectation where they can participate in the company and what are the prerequisites for doing it. So I think there are many factors to try to get the family together, and it's not easy. We have to make it also in the shareholder agreement. We have there are mechanisms for people to leave the company, but so far we have not exercised the last 20 years. So I think we have been successful, but as family grows bigger, there's more diversity, people with different needs. So it may happen in the future, but so far it hasn't happened. So
I imagine that's because a lot of work has gone into keeping people engaged. I really like the way that you talked about the use of the word trust, how important it is to build trust, and how challenging that is as the group gets larger and larger as you go across the generations. And trust is such an important word in family businesses. And sometimes we think either you trust someone or you don't. But the reality is, I think it's more helpful to think of trust like a bank account. And every interaction you have with someone that shows behaviors that show trust, transparency, that you care, you're concerned about them, and so on, you're increasing your account. And that account can be very valuable in those moments when you have stressors and other things where you need people to stick around. So I really like the way that you talked about that.
And you have to practice on a daily basis, because it takes years for you to build a trust, and take just one misbehavior, a single misbehavior, for you to lose all the trust have built through the years. So it's something you have to keep in mind.
Constantly focus on it. Good. Frederico, I want to turn to you. You talked earlier about, in Argentina, you're used to crises. And, one of the things that sort of the research shows is that family businesses tend not to do as well when the economy is growing really rapidly, but tend to do better than other kinds of businesses when the economy is not doing so well. Curious how you have seen, or what ways you've seen that being a family business has actually helped you to navigate through these ups and downs in the economy.
Well, I think one of the decisions I took when I entered the company, that we would never distribute more than 10% of the profits. And many years we couldn't distribute nothing because we didn't have profits. This is one of an example of doing something that is clearly reinforcing your capital, and at the same time showing that you're preserving that on time, and that you must accomplish with your word. Because nobody obliged us not to distribute more than 10%, but we did it. And I think it's a very good example. Second one is to be austerity, to be very, very, and this is something when I read the book of Sam Walton, he enforces that feeling that I had, that it was very important. At least in retailing, you must show that you're keeping the money, caring about the small margins. So I think it's two of the things that are very on the culture of our company. And this is something that makes the financial crisis, well, you are well prepared to trespass, to be resilient.
It's such an important point that you mentioned about distributions and dividends, like how you think about that topic, and making sure that family members really understand that owning a business, you have to think about it like it's an equity, not an annuity, right? It has its ups and downs, and sometimes you're able to pay out dividends, and sometimes you're not, and to prepare people for going on those ups and downs. And you could smooth out that ride a little bit. But family businesses get themselves into a lot of trouble when they create expectations where people think of the family business like a piggy bank and not as a business that needs to reinvest the capital back in. So really helpful insights. We're gonna switch gears a bit and talk about the third kind of capital, social capital. Sometimes it's the most underrated kind, I found. Family businesses have a unique ability to build these trusted relationships. We talked about trust in the family, but you can build these trusted relationships beyond that with your customers, with your suppliers, with the broader public. And that's because often family businesses care about local communities in which you work there, you live there, you have your name on the door. All these things matter. And oftentimes what we think of as trade-offs between more profit and better things for the environment, or between making money and educating the community, those are really only trade-offs in the short term. Over the long term, a stronger environment, a better environmental footprint helps you improve your business performance and reputation and so on. Over the long term, I think in most ways you can actually make money and do the right thing. So Luis, let me come back to you. Can you talk a little bit about how your family values shape how you think about the social purpose of your business?
Well, I think we're quite fortunate that the founder of our company and the generation that came after were people of an extremely altruist spirit, people with a very humble lifestyle, and people that have a very collaborative behavior. And since they come from very humble and very simple region of the country, I think they're not concerned about making business to make money. I think since our founders, it's hard to believe nowadays, but I think the purpose they had is to build a better country, to have more opportunities to people. So this thing about to increase business, we didn't have proper distribution for 50 years of our history. Everything was reinvested, and the brains of our business, they had hospitals, they had daycare, technical schools, elementary schools. So I think it was like a purpose of their lives was to make our Brazil, which was a very agricultural country, to be industrialized and try to have a better lifestyle and better opportunities for people in this country. So this was the spirit that permeated us for many, many years. And most recently, when Brazil opened its economy to don't have any produce for almost anything, then that's where we start to face a lot of our competitors worldwide. And then, of course, you have to, as commodity company, you have to have be low cost. But even being low cost, you need profit to be sustainable in the long term. But you never turn our back to the needs of our communities, to people, to listen and so people can be heard by ourselves. So I think that's a major concern. This everywhere we operate, a little bit less in the United States, which is a very developed country, but in Peru, in Brazil, in North Africa, I think the same spirit permeates through our organization everywhere.
That's such a great point, Luis, about the importance of that social purpose that you see most of the family businesses that I come into contact with. That it's so authentic, that the why, right? And of course, making money is important to survive, but that's not usually the reason or the only reason why the business was founded. And the more that you not only try to keep that purpose alive, but really reignite it in each generation, really kind of helps to keep that connection between the family and the company. Um, let's talk a little bit about these long-term relationships that you're able to build. Enrique, you mentioned earlier about your family business succeeding in part. You have these very large long-term relationships with global companies. And in what ways have you found that being family-owned actually helps you to build and sustain those relationships?
Yes, thank you, Josh. Yes, we have big customers like all OEMs or most of the OEMs operating in America, like Toyota, GM, Chrysler. Well, it's not Chrysler anymore, Stellantis, etc. And the way we have been developing that is we have a philosophy of customer centricity, but especially an attitude of service. And that's kind of the basic. Everyone try to solve the problems for the customers, and they go beyond what is expected. But the second one is that we have been able to demonstrate on the difficult times that we make the decisions. In 2008, in the Great Recession, two of our major two customers, GM and Chrysler, then were facing bankruptcy. And we kept investing and betting on them, knowing that they were going to go bankrupt. And it paid off handsomely. We also bought a company that was going bankrupt, a competitor in the middle of the crisis. And the customers trusted us to take over that in the middle of the crisis, and the bankers gave us money when they were closed. I mean, they were not giving financing to anyone because there was so much uncertainty. So have been thinking long term, being consistent, developing also personal relationships with the customers. Sometimes it's a challenge because they change a lot, the executives. But on this side, there is a history, there is a consistency, there is the personal relationship. They can rely on us. They know that we're good partners in the long term, that we don't take advantage of them, that we try to play a fair game, a win-win relationship, and a long-term view. I think that has been the key. And one thing about the reputation you mentioned, which I might not have time, in a way is very, very important, but it's a consequence of fulfilling our purpose. And for us is to create businesses that, of course, are profitable. They have to be because it's a means to an end, but they need to help create a more prosperous and a sustainable world. And caring about communities is absolutely important. And in this crisis, in the middle of the dark days when we had no sales, etc., we said there was a problem with the ventilators, production of ventilators around the world, and we throw that challenge to our people, to innovation people. So we put like 20 or 30 people and say, wait, we don't know much about it, but there is a specific purpose to save lives in our country. And the people worked very hard, and we were able to put it in a in a record time ventilators that supply 35 hospitals in Mexico and Central America too, some to Central America.
It's such a wonderful, inspiring example. Thank you for sharing it. And it's just another great instance of where you do the right thing because it's the right thing to do for the community, for your employees, for your suppliers, and customers and so on. But if you keep doing the right thing over time, it will pay off. It creates an advantage, and you don't do it for that reason. And it's precisely because you're not doing it for that reason that it actually creates something meaningful. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, we've talked a lot about different kinds of capital. We're going to talk a little bit about decision making. And given the pace of change in the global economy, making big moves quickly is at more of a premium than ever. Family businesses often have flatter structures, fewer layers to the ultimate decision makers. That can allow them to act faster when it comes time to make major decisions. Federico, you mentioned earlier about your ability, if the company has grown even, to make moves fast. Can you talk a little bit about the ways in which family ownership allows you to move quickly as a business?
Well, I think we have a structure that is more flat than in other companies, with much more trust because we know profoundly each other, and to know how to work in Argentina for us is normal, but for our competitors, many are foreign companies, like the great supermarkets like Carrefour, etc. The timing is fundamental. When you are in a context of such volatility, you have the possibility to take a decision in 24 hours instead of have to wait the instructions of the company. I think it's a clear advantage.
Great, thank you for that. And Luis, your family has had to make some moves of a different kind. As you mentioned earlier, as the Brazilian economy opened, some of the areas in which your business has been have become globalized and commoditized. How has being family owned helped you to make some big changes, including taking one of the companies public this week?
Yeah, well, I think I can answer in two ways this question. First, of course, decision making is quite fast. I think when you have the owner close to the organization, I think you always trying to lead and try to get the best out of the people, your collaborators, and you try to make most of the things with less money to be very competitive. But I would disappoint you a little bit because until 10 years ago, this decision making to change visions and to refresh the portfolio was not easy because we have 18 members of our family working some 15 years ago in the company. Every time you criticize the business, you try to change a little bit the portfolio, people were really attached to the business and they were proud of the business they had, even though they're not making money. It was something you can see that won't solve the problems of a given business through time. So sometimes a family business, and if you have too many people or your family in the organization, can be a barrier for you to make changes. And now, after two very extensive governance changes made in the company, today I think people understand this. So we have just one policy for the company. Otherwise, before we had everyone in a given branch of the business, everyone with its own policies. And today, I think we try to conciliate our social responsibility, our profits on the long term, and also we are able to mitigate risk in different ways. So I think today you are more flexible to make the change. So this being really true only from 7 to 5 years ago, that been able to move the portfolio around here. And in the last 2 years, we made two of our companies public, one in New York and Toronto, and just today, one in Brazilian stock exchange. So it takes a while, but you have to attract good people, and it's not easy when family can be united, but can be also a refractory point for you to make changes. So.
Luis, it's such an important point. I'm glad you raised it. Each of these things we're talking about are potential advantages. You have to do the work to sustain them. And as the business and family get more complex and larger, if you don't do that work, then they can become disadvantages too. So thank you for in highlighting the way in which you really had to do some important work in order to create and sustain this ability to make changes and move. So lastly, I just wanted the last one we'll talk about, and we'll do this quickly to get to your questions. One of the biggest threats to company success these days is that managers make decisions that are counter to the interests of the owners. They pay themselves too much. They make acquisitions for the wrong reasons. Family businesses are much more able to build governance structures that make that alignment between the owners and the managers easier, often because those are the same people. But even if not, you're able to actually create those connections earlier. So, Lise, maybe just to pick up on the thread that you were talking about, your family's invested a lot of time and energy into building governance. Any lessons that you'd share about how to do that well with the group?
Too many and too little time to tell. But first, I think lessons learned. First, I think do not try to do it by yourself. I think every family business that wants to do a change in governance, I think should have a moderator that's equidistant to all shareholders, a mediator that can have a lot of emotional IQ, people that are able to listen and hear to what people are saying. Also, what else? I think you have to do a lot of investment, talent management, like you said, to be able to attract and retain, especially people in the new generation. I think this is quite important, so people know that your company is not get too old-fashioned. We are being able to attract new generations to the system. I think I don't know that maybe also the lesson
That's
learned
great.
is you have to really create a forum where you have you give people the freedom to speak out freely, and you have to listen to what they want to tell you, because I think family business can be family members can be very helpful in taking hard decisions, but sometimes they can really try to lock very important decisions in your company. So I think it's like I said, it's a very dynamic subject, and I think there are a lot of lessons learned. I think the one is listen to everyone, exercise a flexible leadership style. Sometimes, if you have a family member that have a very rigid leadership style, sometimes it's very hard to attract talent to your organization. And there are too many things to talk about. But anyway.
A subject for another conversation for sure. We could spend the whole time on governance, and I think the point you made, not just about creating the spaces and the forums to do the work, but also attracting family members, even those that are not going to work in the business day to day, giving them a space and a pathway to participate in governance is really important. Enrique, I'll go to you last before we open up to the Q&A. I know you've done a lot of work on governance as well. What are a couple of things you would highlight about how to do it well?
Just a little bit of context. I'm second generation, one of 9 siblings. Third G is 39, and 4G is over 65, and probably are going to be more than 120. So it's family is growing exponentially, and some of the policies that Federico mentioned, reinvesting, low dividend payment, thinking more on the responsibility of being owner and the legacy that you have to leave is very important. A couple of lessons is, one is you need to govern both business and family, and both have different values, a set of values and different ways of handling, so you cannot mix them. You have to separate and deliberately govern them, and I think we have been able to do that. Secondly, I think governance is an evolution, and as we have evolved from a relatively small family to a very large family, it becomes complex, the business were local, now they're global, it's more complex. Then you have to, the other lesson that we learned, you have to handle the corporate model as if you were a public company in the business side. not in the family. In the family, your family. In the business, your family. And therefore, we have been adjusting boards, etc., and with a mix of independent members and family members from second G and family members from 3G, because transitions takes time. And as Luis said, is through example, is through training and developing them, is to expose them, obviously attract the best. We moved to a merit-based governance for the 3G because there were so many and so much talent. And we have a challenge of being more inclusive in terms of the women. There's a couple of three or four 3G who has master's degree in business, but still we're struggling to how to involve them. And I think another lesson, and that's it. Selecting independent members is key. You don't only select because of the brains, but it's very important that you select them because of their values, that they're compatible, that they fit with your culture, and that they really want to help you out, that they're not there for money. And this creates trust, what they say, and collaboration between family and independent member to make the best decision for the business.
Thank you, Enrique. Such great examples of the work to be done. And it's never done, right? It's always evolving. It's changing as the family and the business changes. So it's a constant enterprise of building good, effective governance. I'll turn it over to Jorge to get to some questions from the audience. Before I do, I just want to give a heartfelt thank you to the panelists for sharing such amazing experiences and examples of how the unique and special things family businesses can do. I learned a lot, and I hope others joining did as well. So with that, Jorge, I'll turn it over to you to see if we have any questions from the audience.
We have a couple of very interesting, and thank you, George, and the panelists. Let me go straight into some of them. And thank you, all of those that have presented, and we encourage you, if you want, if we couldn't reply to all, we'll do it offline to you, but thank you. Andre from Red Run, he was saying, you mentioned, George, about the challenge of doing the capital allocation and the quality of that allocation through good decisions. When there are family members within the organization, that tension in doing quality and good quality resource allocation may be even more challenging. How to deal when you have family members, and we felt that probably you, George, may have a quick answer, and then probably Luis Arminio, given the extent of their family too.
It's a really great question, and a complicated challenge, because these issues are business issues, but they become very personalized. And I think I'll offer one piece of advice, and would love to hear what Luis and others would say as well. I think good process helps a lot. Where you're setting up in advance as you're making these decisions about capital investment. What is the criteria that you're going to use to make those decisions? How are you going to evaluate them? What resources are you going to use to bring to the table to assess them? Enrique mentioned the value of an independent board, and this is one of the many places that independent directors can bring huge value to a family businesses in helping to make these complicated trade-offs that affect people's livelihoods and passion projects and so on. So I would just highlight that in a family business, how you do things is oftentimes even more important than what you do. So setting up in advance good process, good structure to help you navigate those decisions before you make them can go a long way to taking some of the emotionality and sort of the negative reaction to it.
The comment I would do, like, I agree 100% what George said, and I think in our case, a very important step was to separate ownership from management. Because today the world is very dynamic, the decisions have to be fast. So see, every time we have to consult the family what should do the investment or not, it will be impossible. So at the ownership board, you just set the mandate, the type of investments you want, what the things you don't want gambling, don't a few things, and set a sort of an average rate of return for developed countries, undeveloped countries. And then we have full liberty with our management board, which has 3 family members and 4 independent members from outside the family, with a lot of diversity in knowledge, and this has helped us, to take very fast decisions on our company, and helps a lot, because sometimes I know the family, they can lock up important decisions, and sometimes don't have the time to wait for family to do that. So today we have a very dynamic and a very good decision-making process in our company. So Josh, I think you're right. Process is very important.
Thank you, Luis. Another question, and this may be addressed to Enrique, who mentioned about the escalation of the family member size. It's regarding the next generation members that might include, depending on the family strategy and policy, if family members of next generation will be working or not, or might be part of family councils. But the question being how to prepare for the next generation members who do not work on the business about a smooth transition and somehow the satisfaction of their own perceived roles within the extended family.
Thank you. Very good question and very hard to answer. But let me tell you what we have done. The family business, the family board. One of the objectives is to be the unity and the unity of the family and the commitment to the business. So there is a lot of organizations, a lot of events, building trust, knowing each other well, talking about family business, talking about businesses, etc. So a lot of communication. For example, we have a family retreat every year. We have a quarterly reports to all shareholders, working or not in the company. We have a couple of shareholders meeting with a lot of detail, etc. The other thing that we do is the family board develops a lot of formative, to be aware of business, to have training on business, even if they're not trained in a business school or an MBA. They do a lot of courses in that respect. And then we have a service similar to what they said, that when they graduate, we provide them counseling to develop their potential, no matter what they want to do, but we want them all to be leaders, whatever they do. So we hired expert people, coaches, to help them develop. And as a consequence, we spot the ones that are the brightest or more interested in the business, and we invite them into the business. And we only invite we have many rules for one to be inside the business. And some of my nephews said, and nieces said, that it seemed like we put the rules as if we don't want anyone in the business. And the reason, if you have too many, it's very complex. So we try to have few. Right now, 3 work in the 3G members work. The 2G members retired because to create more, to create less difficulty in decision-making process. And therefore we engage them at the board. We gave them shares since they're 18, so they can go to the shareholders meeting, and they also participate at different levels at the board levels, with boys and no vote, and then the developing program, and then they graduate, and the junior board members, and then when they're seasoned enough, they can be senior. So it's many aspects, but it's a lot of communication, building trust, knowing each other, clarity on what we want, a mandate. We also created a mandate from the family to the business. That helps a lot making the succession. And especially starting with it takes a long time. So starting early is key in this process.
Thank you, Enrique. And this was a question presented by Armando Subiliaga. So hope, Armando, that this experiences from Enrique would have somehow answered your question. Federico, there is another question that I believe would be relevant given your experience, if you could answer or share your experience. I think in a very simplified way, many organizations are thinking about their why, their what, and their how. So why that sense of purpose for the organization that many of you mentioned today, the what being the strategy through which you are trying to express that why, and finally the how, and the how in a simplified way being the culture. I think many of you talk about values and how the family values will be embedded into the organization. But Enrique mentioned specifically about behaviors, because values you could present them in post, in PowerPoints, in many dimensions, but at the end are behaviors that would express that. So at the end, it's about walking the talk. We heard a lot about the B Corp, the B corporations, and many of the examples around the world are small companies or mid-sized companies. You three are all large corporations. What is your experience, given the history of La Anónima, Federico, on how to walk the talk, and how do you feel that your family and yourself have been able to walk the talk, and eventually considering these issues on B Corp affiliation or certification?
Well, we have since 2002 with a big crisis in Argentina. I was really shocked because if the vote would think, don't matter how old you are, you're gonna die. So I began to read, to think about what's the purpose of the company and the importance of, instead of think of a shareholder, to think as stakeholders, no? The triple purpose, you know, social and ecological. In many aspects, we were doing that without knowing that we wanted to be a big corporation. For example, I always mentioned an example is produce local, to help local producers has a triple benefit, because you are more clean. The second, you give work to local society, and you do more money because you're cheaper. And this is something that I always mention talking with in a board of the B corporation, that this is not charity. It's to think, to use your intelligence to do things right. That means do money, but at the same time help the community and help the ecology. And another fantastic example, you know, that supermarkets use plastic bags. And plastic bags is a disaster ecologically. We convince in almost the 80 cities to the authorities to help us that we have to discontinue this plastic bags, and we did it, and we are doing more money because they're and people is fascinated because they feel they're helping the ecology. So you can do more money doing the right things. 2 years ago, we decided to try to put this in metrics and with a standard, and we choose the B corporation, and we are in the process of trying to be qualified. No matter if we get it or not, but we are in the process, and the process is very, very interesting. How the management is very involved and very happy to do that type of work. It's a lot of work, and it affects in many aspects the company, but it's for good, for sure.
Thank you, Federico. And it's amazing a company of your size is willing at least to commit to the process and to learn about that certification journey. So thank you. One final question is this may be also to you, Enrique. many of these digital transformation processes that many of your companies probably have gone through have brought this idea of thinking broader than their own company, thinking about the ecosystems. Also, Federico mentioned about his own thinking up to 2002 regarding the stakeholders. But at the same time, your corporations are trying to change the world, and it's not only about customers and communities, but even the public sector. In your experience, Enrique, and I heard one story in the middle of the pandemic with all the factories stopped, and some of the differences between the reactivation in the US and in Mexico, how the industry, and maybe under your leadership, you dealt with that, somehow convincing or working with the government in order to change some of the rules just to speed up their recovery. But as an example, also Federico mentioned about working with the government and producing this protocol for working on supermarkets. If you could share that experience, Enrique, would be great.
Just to clarify, the experience of transformation or the experience of how to work with the government in this situation?
Yeah. How to work with the government when you need to convince them about the opening eventually of the factories. Yeah.
Yes, as George mentioned, the family business tend to develop long-term relationships, and we do it also with local government and with the federal government. So I spend, and that's part of my job now, developing those relationships. So we were able at the middle, there was uncertainty if Mexico was going to be open when the U.S. will open, and that created a major undertaking because our products are big products. We are the only supplier for them, and if we don't produce them, the customer will stop and they cannot start. So we had to do a lot of lobbying, including the president himself, to be able to commit to restart with all the safety precautions. And the benchmark was done throughout the world, China, etc., experiences, to restart companies with all the safety protocols, but we had no choice. So we spent, myself and several of my colleagues, a lot of time on that. And on the local part, we help healthcare public institutions, providing them safety equipment, masks, and other things that were not available. We helped the vulnerable people that lost their job. We developed with NAFIN, with the Development Bank of Mexico, special programs to support suppliers, because Mexico, as you know, had one of the lowest GDP investments in this pandemic, 2 to 4%, compared to 25% of the USA. So a lot of that part was done by the private sector, and so the commitment, long-term commitment with the country, with the authorities, with governments, collaborating with all colors of parties was key into this undertaking.
Thank you, Enrique, and thank you, Luis and Federico and Enrique, and obviously Josh, for this very rich discussion. So it has now to Maria Lourdes. We are about to finish. And I hope that these conversations will continue, given its relevance and the impact that you all have on society. Thank you.
Josh and the team at BanyanGlobal, thank you so much, Jorge, as always. Absolutely fantastic job. As I think Josh mentioned, it's not what is done, but how a family business is run. And for that reason, Enrique, Federico, Luis, very grateful, because not only did you spend quite a bit of time with our members today, but really you shared very openly, the things that you've learned. And one of the things we've learned during this very difficult year is that collaboration is extremely important. So thank you to everyone. We hope to be able to host you again. And thank you to everybody who joined us well. And I hope everybody stays well.